Shocking encounter in the far north. The comeback life of a 59-year-old bachelor. Before you read, please help by sharing this story. It's very important to us. I want to live a different life, experience a world I've never seen. This was the decision made by Daniel Harper, a 59-year-old man from Los Angeles, California, as he entered the later part of his life. After nearly 20 years drifting in a corporate office, tired of the crowded city and the rat race, he felt that only a drastic change in environment could bring him the peace he longed for. He had always been fascinated by Nordic landscapes, vast snow fields, the sparsely populated world of the midnight sun, and ancient Sami culture. But he didn't choose popular tourist destinations like Oslo or Bergen. Instead, he decided to venture even further north. So, Daniel sold his house, accessed his savings and investments, and embarked on a solo journey to Norway. After a brief stop in Oslo, he took a domestic flight to the area near Tromsø in the north. There, he rented an SUV, planning to leisurely enjoy the transition from summer to autumn, time of long days and gradually lengthening nights. Locals said the weather was unpredictable during this period, but it was an excellent time to experience the unique beauty of the Arctic Circle. I want to go where others can't, breathe freely, Daniel Harper resolved, driving north without hesitation. He drove through Tromsø city, following the E6 highway north, passing through towns and villages in the Finnmark region, admiring the scattered pastures and ports along the way. But when he entered a desolate area barely marked on the map, he began to feel a sense of unease. Surely the road isn't closed. It's not winter yet, he thought. But in the Arctic, the weather often doesn't play by the rules. About a week later, his SUV suddenly broke down on a remote stretch of road. It was the transition between summer and autumn, with gale-force winds, heavy rain mixed with hail, and the temperature plummeting. What the hell is this place? Through the car window, he could only see the gray sea, low hills, and sparse pine and birch trees. The road sign was rusty, the letters blurry. He quickly pulled out his phone, but found not a single bar of signal. Realizing he couldn't call for help, a chill went through him. Luckily, after walking along the road for about half an hour, he found an old road sign that read Gamvik. Gamvik? I think I saw it on the map. It should be one of the northernmost villages in Europe, he thought. Despite his bad situation, he sighed with relief. At least a village meant people where he could seek help. He turned on his hazard lights, parked the car by the roadside, packed his luggage, and started walking. The sea wind was biting, and he was shivering with cold, but a glimmer of hope ignited inside him. After walking for about 20 minutes, he began to see some scattered houses, red wooden houses with gray roofs scattered on the hillside, most doors and windows shut. It seemed to be a sparsely populated village with hardly anyone visible on the street. Out of sheer desperation, he knocked on someone's door. A white woman who looked to be in her early 20s opened the door a crack and looked at him suspiciously. Daniel explained in broken English that he was a tourist from America and his car had broken down. "Please wait, I'll get the village chief," the woman said and closed the door. Before long, he was led to a building that looked like the village council hall. To his surprise, gathered in the room were astonishingly only women, about 15 or 16 people, ages ranging from 20s to 50s, not a single man. "What's going on?" "All women." Daniel Harper was greatly surprised, but first explained his situation in detail. A woman around 40, who looked like the leader, named Ingrid, asked in English, "What are you doing coming all the way out here? We haven't seen a tourist in a long time." Daniel smiled awkwardly and said, "I just wanted to travel freely in the Nordics, drove here following the map, didn't expect it to be so remote, and my car broke down." Ingrid thought for a moment and nodded. "Gamvik is very remote. There's no repair shop, and we can't repair your car anytime soon. How about this? You stay in our village for now, and we'll figure something out." The other women seemed to be whispering among themselves, and then reached an agreement to temporarily take him in. "We haven't had a man here for a long time, and you don't look like a bad person. We can't just leave you out here in the wilderness, but you must follow our village rules." Someone muttered softly, "Many of us have been hurt by men, so we stopped letting men into the village later." Daniel felt curious and sympathetic. Regardless, they arranged a small cabin for him. Although it wasn't winter yet, the temperature was already low at night, the sea wind howling, so keeping warm was very important. The women brought him a sleeping bag, blankets, and some daily necessities. Tell us if you need anything, but you also have to help us with village work. He readily agreed. Of course, I can't just eat and live for free. The next morning, Daniel walked around Gamvik, near the northernmost tip of Europe, known for its extreme climate-long winters with almost no sunlight and summers with the midnight sun phenomenon. He had read a report before saying that this village had serious population loss and faced extinction. Seeing it firsthand, he felt this even more deeply. There was hardly anyone visible on the street, and it looked empty. The houses were run down, and the phone signal was intermittent. He realized that once his car broke down, it was truly a big problem. What puzzled him was why there wasn't a single man in the village. Last night, Ingrid, who looked like the village chief, had briefly explained that due to changes in the industrial structure, young people had left to work elsewhere, and the remaining men had died of old age or illness. Young men and women had all left, but some women chose to stay and protect this land. But because there were no men, there were no newborns either, and the bloodline faced extinction. We have always lived by ourselves as women, isolated from the outside world. Time seemed to have stopped, she said. Daniel thought, this is really serious. If there's no one, the village will soon disappear, right? In the following days, he saw the women engaged in small-scale farming, fishing, and handicrafts in a self-sufficient way. The problem was they had to stockpile enough firewood and food to cope with the long, cold winter, but there was little support from the outside world, which made them feel overwhelmed. Now, the women took turns doing the heavy physical labor previously done by men, which left them exhausted. Daniel could feel the women's strong will, but deep down, they still yearned for men's strength and skills. Most importantly, there were no children. Some women in their 20s and 30s said, "We also want to have children, but it's simply not possible. Even if we wanted artificial insemination or sperm donation, the procedures and costs are very troublesome. Unless a man is willing to settle here, it's difficult to form a family." Daniel felt uncomfortable listening to this. I understand. I used to have a family, and I've seen people around me without children, then divorce or become widowed. I can slightly understand that feeling of emptiness. The women asked cautiously, "Do you have your own story too?" He mentioned his divorce experience somewhat awkwardly, saying he was now single and drifting around. The women gradually opened up to him, inviting him to communal meals and meetings. They operated like a cooperative, managing various resources and income through distribution, but lacked professional management experience. Daniel said, "I had experience in business management back in the States. I think it would be better if you could operate more systematically." For example, he suggested developing tourism. Gamvik's location is extremely northern. It has the potential to be developed into a unique adventure tourism destination. Many people come here just to see the northern lights or experience the midnight sun. Even in summer, many people want to see the midnight sun. The women were a bit surprised. "Can it really work?" Daniel said confidently. "Of course, the challenges will certainly be significant, but polar tourism enthusiasts from all over the world love places like this. As long as we build a small hotel or create some unique projects, it could be successful." Some younger women heard this and said excitedly, "Sounds good. We can participate too. We can contact the outside world, renovate houses, build a website, and attract tourists. But we don't understand English very well, and we don't have much funding," they said a bit worried. Daniel said, "I can invest some funds, and I can also provide you with some online promotion techniques and crowdfunding channels." He expressed his willingness to do his part. In fact, he had accessed his savings and investments back in Los Angeles and originally planned to use them for retirement. It would be great if he could use this money to do something meaningful. After several days of discussion, the women unanimously agreed. Let's try developing tourism and fight for the future of the village. Of course, it may not be successful, but if things continue like this, it's a dead end, so it's worth a try. And since we don't have men here, a lot of heavy physical labor and construction skills are difficult. Maybe Daniel can help lead us. They also held a glimmer of hope. Daniel fixed the heating and doors jar windows in one house. The women saw this and thought, "We really do need a man's strength." As the cooperative tourism project started, the village began to get busy. Daniel did not hold a leadership position, but in fact, all the women respected his opinion. They contacted the outside world, bought second-hand building materials, and prepared to build a simple guest house, getting ready for adventure experience projects in far north Gambik. With a man present, the women's enthusiasm also increased significantly. It seems there is hope now. This sentence could be heard everywhere in the village. As time passed, the women's attitude toward Daniel also changed from initial politeness to more warmth. Some young women began to express affection for him, inviting him for walks or barbecues on the beach on weekends. He felt a bit confused, but deep down, he also felt a stirring. He had been single for a long time, and he was the only man in this village. He felt maybe something would happen one day. Finally, one day, a woman in her early 30s named Sophia confided her predicament to him. Actually, I want to have a child, but there are no men in the village. Does this sound strange? He felt his heartbeat faster. Sophia continued, we don't know each other deeply enough yet, but most women in the village want to have children. We haven't had men for a long time, and watching the village population get smaller and smaller, we feel desperate. Now that you've come, we see hope. Daniel was speechless for a moment. A few days later, after Ingrid discussed with the women in the village, she announced shocking news. If you are willing, most of the women in our village want to form relationships with you and have children. He was so shocked that he took a step back and said, this is too crazy, isn't it? But Ingrid said, we haven't had men for a long time, and population loss is very severe. Even if we find a man from outside to marry, they will go to the city, and sperm donation is also very troublesome. So, someone like you is too precious. We sincerely plead with you. He was already 59. Although married before, he had been single and childless. Maybe having children was a new opportunity. However, the idea of having relationships with over a dozen women simultaneously still put him under enormous pressure. Is this possible? I can't even handle one person, he said. The women said, we know this is difficult, but to solve the population crisis, not just one or two, but as many women as possible need to give birth. If you agree, we will coordinate the order investigation and try not to put too much burden on you. Their way of answering showed they had systematically considered this issue. Daniel was completely shocked by the situation before him, but he could also feel the women's despair, and he might never have the chance to have so many children in his life. If I can do something for this village, he was overcome by a strange emotion. Furthermore, the women emphasized this was not just physical desire but a cooperation for the survival of the village, which made his heart waver. After a long time considering, he finally said, I cannot guarantee I can satisfy all the women, but I will do my best. But the prerequisite is we must respect each other, no coercion, and you genuinely want to have children. This news quickly spread throughout the village. This man has agreed to have children with us. The women in their 20s and 30s almost cheered, and even those in their 40s and 50s who thought they could still give birth hoped to participate. In other words, most women of childbearing age expressed the desire for children, and so an unprecedented collective pregnancy plan began. This plan proceeded secretly and orderly. Each woman checked her body and promised to spend time with Daniel according to her ovulation periods. The village chief was responsible for coordination, trying to avoid jealousy and disputes. The first few days were awkward for everyone, but unexpectedly, everything went smoothly because everyone wanted to have children and continue the village's bloodline. Daniel felt physically tired, but the women also tried their best to be considerate, taking care of his diet and rest. Sometimes, wonderful feelings also emerged. Some girls in their 20s would ask shyly, Leader, this is my first time. Please be gentle. A woman in her late 30s, almost 40, cried and said, I never thought I would have children. Daniel listened to each of their stories, realizing how much they longed for children. Finally, a month passed, and it was time to check for pregnancy. Each woman used pregnancy test sticks bought from the mainland or online or simple blood tests to check herself. The results were shocking. Most people's test results were positive. Really? Are you the sperm king? They said jokingly. Daniel felt a bit embarrassed, but also filled with joy and fear at the same time. I'm going to be the father of so many children all at once, and they are all my children. Is this possible? But the women firmly supported him. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. We will raise the children together. You don't have to take care of all the children. This is our collective effort. In this situation, Over a dozen people suddenly became pregnant, and because everyone was becoming a mother for the first time, they needed strength and nutrition. Daniel bought more food and nutrients through the cooperative and intensified preparation of firewood for winter heating. When the children are born, they will need a warmer environment. Because they hadn't had men for a long time, these preparations had been neglected, but as he took care of them one by one, the women also systematically participated. Pregnant women walked in the village every morning and evening, touching each other's bellies, exclaiming, "If we really have children at the same time, that would be so interesting." However, pregnancy was not easy. Some had severe morning sickness, some were dizzy, and others had back pain and couldn't work. Whenever this happened, Daniel would say, "Don't overtire yourselves. I and others will help share the workload." Truly grateful. "We've never had a man's help. So lucky to have someone like you," the women said with smiles. In fact, because the climate here was harsh, the winter was long, and everything had to be prepared in advance, it was a huge challenge for Daniel. But because everyone in the village worked together, everything went smoothly without any major difficulties. As the due date approached, Daniel was busy raising funds and preparing for childbirth. The cooperative had earned some money from external trade, so they allocated a portion of the funds to buy childbirth supplies and medicine and contacted temporary nurses. He contacted hospitals in larger mainland cities and decided to prepare emergency measures just in case, whether snowmobiles or helicopters. Of course, the cost was considerable, but everyone agreed because the village was about to welcome new life. Finally, over a dozen people, almost in the same stage of pregnancy, began giving birth with intervals of 1 or 2 weeks. The first was a woman in her 30s who screamed early in the morning, "Oh my belly, the baby is coming out." Daniel and the other women rushed over and carried her into the wooden cabin. They prepared hot water, towels, and medicine and asked the nurse to assist with a simple delivery. After several hours of pain, the baby's cry echoed throughout the village. Born! Everyone cheered excitedly, and Daniel hugged the new mother, shedding tears. In the following 10 days, other pregnant women also began giving birth one after another, even 2 people giving birth on the same day, which caused a stir in the village. "Nurse, another one is giving birth here. Wait, you have to finish this one first." The scene was chaotic at times. Despite this, everyone gave birth successfully without any accidents. Whenever the children cried out one by one, villagers would clap and hug, saying, "We are going to see so many babies all at once." Daniel had never experienced such a scene and felt a bit overwhelmed. Over a dozen people giving birth to his children within 1 or 2 weeks was simply unbelievable. After hearing the news that mother and baby were safe, about a month later, when the mothers and babies were stable, the village held a grand celebration. "Today is the day we declare the village's revival," was the women's unanimous sentiment. The village, which had long been stagnant due to the lack of men and children, now welcomed an important turning point with the birth of over a dozen babies. When these children grow up, the village will become lively again. In fact, with the cries and laughter of newborns everywhere, the village atmosphere suddenly became vibrant and joyful. On the day of the celebration, Daniel realized he was treated like a hero. "Leader, thank you for giving us children." The women took turns hugging him, expressing their gratitude. Some even cried, saying, "My lifelong wish was to have a child, and now it has finally come true." The joint parenting method they could only imagine had now finally been realized. Remember, they had always lived in a world without men. Daniel himself also felt it was a bit like a dream, but he felt a peculiar sense of accomplishment, which he believed was the result of the women's seriousness and effort and the result of his own decision. Finally, a huge bonfire was lit in the center of the village, and against the backdrop of the Arctic Ocean, the celebration continued late into the night. Unlike the days without men, now there was a man. Daniel Harper as the father of many children, and everyone could enjoy this celebration with peace of mind. As the celebration was nearing its end, someone shouted, "Let's throw the leader." Someone asked Daniel about the custom of throwing people. He had heard of it before, smiled, and waved his hand, but already nearly 20 women were holding hands, lifting him high. Luckily, those women who had just given birth had weaker physical strength and were led by others. As he felt waves of exciting stimulation in the air, the the baby's cries also joined in, creating an emotional feeling that was hard to control. After coming down, he said, choked up, so happy. I've never felt this way in my life. After the children were born and the initial postnatal care ended, the women began seriously operating the tourism project. Now that we have children, let's seriously open up the village and welcome tourists. An Arctic village filled with children's cries, this in itself is a unique charm. Daniel also agreed and invested the cooperative's profits intensively, slightly improving the infrastructure. He contacted small cities on the mainland, provided small shuttle buses and accommodation services, and planned products such as winter aurora tours, summer midnight sun experiences, sea fishing, and a glimpse into the village's unique large family culture. He established a tourism website in Europe, Gamvik, a remote village near Europe's northernmost point. Now there are children, and the village has been revived. Some explorers showed curiosity and sent inquiries via email. Do the women who gave birth here live in a community? If they asked, what about the man? He would only answer, a man settled down and rebuilt this village. In the initial stage, they only revealed the main story because they were afraid that if they said too much, it would turn into a scandal. As the number of tourists gradually increased, profits increased accordingly, and life in the village also became more convenient. With this money, heating and water supply facilities were improved, and funds were allocated for healthcare and education, regularly inviting nurses and teachers to serve the village. As the children grew, the village was no longer as sad and closed as before. We are one big family. We raise our children together and build the future together. They were filled with pride. Travelers were also touched by the sight of children running around and how they lived in the extreme natural environment. This is truly amazing, that there is only this one man raising children with these women. They whispered among themselves, but on the surface, they welcomed Gamvik's rebirth. Perhaps Daniel carried enormous mental and physical pressure, being in his late 50s and becoming the father of dozens of children he never anticipated. However, due to the women advocating for joint parenting, he did not show favoritism to any child but cared for them equally, while spending a significant part of his daily life on cooperative operations and tourism planning. The children's responses also varied, but they usually called Daniel Dad or Leader and listened to him well. Dad, can I go to the beach with you? Dad, help me do this. If you followed these small requests, you wouldn't even know how the day passed. Nevertheless, he was very happy. I worked hard back in the States, and I never imagined I would have such a large family in this distant north. It is often so moving I can hardly believe it. On the other hand, how the women built relationships with their children, work, and the man was also an important task. Luckily, this village adopted a unique system through agreement. We are all mothers, and Daniel Harper is the father of all the children. Jealousy and conflict might not be absent, but due to the community's despair and mutual respect, they seemed to live without major conflicts. On the contrary, when one encountered difficulties, they naturally took turns looking after the children, saying, when you're in difficulty, I'll look after your child. Tomorrow, I'll look after mine. One evening, when the entire village gathered around a bonfire to enjoy traditional dancing and singing, Daniel suddenly shouted, we are one big family. We have proven that even on this Arctic beach, we can laugh together, raise children together, and live happily together. Then the women applauded in response. That's right, the painful days without men are over. We were reborn when we met you. Some young women shouted, let's throw our leader. Everyone gently lifted him again. 1, 2, 3 as his body rose and fell in the night sky. The children cheered excitedly. This scene was like a movie. Even after that, the village continued to change. Over the years, as the children who had already been born grew up, other women wondered, should I try getting pregnant now? Even women who had postponed having children began to seriously consider the issue. Daniel thought with a smile, could his physical strength handle it at almost 60? But the women said, then we will try our best to be considerate to you. As a result, a second and third wave of pregnancies occurred. Of course, not everyone became pregnant at the same time, but children were born steadily, and the total population increased to 2 or 3 times its previous size. The village's population increased again, and the economy and life also became vibrant. The Norwegian government was surprised by the population increase in Gamvik. Tourism also developed well. The story of this village as a large family living together in the Arctic spread, and although the number was small, it still attracted a group of loyal followers. Some travelers were curious about the story of one man raising children with the women in the village and asked about the internal situation, but the village side always appropriately drew the line, saying, "This is our collective choice. Please respect our privacy." When the children reached primary school age, infrastructure had been upgraded, such as new teachers moving in or the village connecting to school buses from nearby cities. Daniel worried whether the children would have to go to bigger cities when they reached middle and high school age, but since there was a possibility of government support for remote education or small schools, he decided to continue living in the village and let them grow up here for now. Some women chose to go to the mainland to study, obtain teaching qualifications, and then teach the children directly in the village. In this way, 5 and 10 years passed. Daniel was already well into his 60s, but the number of children had increased to nearly 10 or 20, and everyone was playing happily. The large family community he had created with the women had become a special example that could not be found anywhere else in the world. Even if media or documentaries sometimes came to ask, is it possible for one man to run a village with dozens of women and children? The villagers would confidently say, "We are a community formed by mutual agreement and love." What do outsiders understand? We are very happy like this, and then laugh it off. One evening, Daniel climbed the hillside by the sea and watched the sunset. The sea was calm, and children were laughing and running in the distance. A rather large child ran up to him and called, "Dad, are you going to throw me up again today?" when he asked innocently. Daniel smiled and said, "We'll see about that." A few women walked over and said, "Oh, the child wants to be thrown up again. Leader, should we hurry and throw him?" The children excitedly spread their arms, and everyone clapped their hands, and so appeared the rare scene of the children being lifted up together with Daniel. The children giggled, and Daniel said with a smile, "Be careful, don't fall." As the sun gradually set below the horizon, the sunset turned red. There, the villagers were excited, talking to each other, the sea wind blowing through their hair. Daniel turned his head, looked at the children playing around, and felt proud that he had created such a scene. Most of the women had given birth and become mothers, and the cooperative and tourism were quite mature, so they lived a comfortable life, even if it didn't look flashy from the outside. A dreamlike transformation had taken place in this remote village. This was a truly large family and a community that had integrated together. When night came and the sun completely disappeared, and the cold wind swept through Gamvik, the warmth of the people was even more radiant. When Daniel entered the communal dining hall holding a baby, the women set the table and said proudly, "How's the grilled fish today? We just caught it from the beach." The scene of carefully feeding the children, saying, "You must eat carefully," because they held up the spoon and made a fuss. Thus it continued endlessly. It was like a huge extended family where even small arguments could be quickly resolved with laughter. They blessed the moment they stayed in the village and built a family in their own way. Daniel enjoyed a night walk after dinner and looked up at the starry sky. He concluded that he would be able to see his life end here. Even if the children one day ventured into the wider world, he believed this village would still be a home they could return to. The women said, "Because of you, we have children, and this village has become prosperous. I don't know how to express our gratitude," they confessed. But he would answer each time, "I never thought I would be the father of so many children. Perhaps I am more grateful." A touching love flowed between them. Because there were many children and many mothers, the throwing ceremony naturally became frequent. Whether it was a child celebrating their first birthday, starting school, or the cooperative signing an important contract with the mainland, or even for no special reason, gathering to celebrate had become a daily occurrence. The throwing ceremony was present without exception at every celebration. As the children grew up and saw this scene, they learned that the throwing ceremony quickly became a ritual celebrating their leader. Daniel grumbled, "I don't do this often back in the States either." The women smiled and said, "This is Gamvik. This is how we live." As the children gradually mastered languages, They spoke English and Norwegian fluently. One child, picking up on Daniel's American roots, might even try out a phrase, perhaps saying, "Hey, Dad," in a way that blended their languages. Everyone burst into laughter. Children growing up in this multilingual environment were full of curiosity and seemed destined for great achievements in the future. There was even an ambitious child who said, "When I grow up, I will let the whole world know about this village." This village, which had become inhabited only by women, had now developed into a large family with dozens of sons and daughters. Occasionally, travelers would pass through this village from the city or other regions. When they asked, "How can you raise so many children in a place like this? What about the man?" the women would answer cheerfully with a smile, "We have our leader. He saved us." Some were surprised and asked, "Is he the children's father?" But they did not say directly that there were once over 10 people pregnant at the same time. However, those early travelers realized something special was happening and would usually say with emotion, "Something amazing and wonderful is happening." And so, in the remote village of Gamvik, at the northernmost tip of Norway, an American man in his late 50s, Daniel Harper, accidentally stayed due to a car breakdown and sparked an innovation. He lived together with a village inhabited only by women, together built a new life, created tourism, achieved economic prosperity, and at the same time reached an agreement with many women to have children simultaneously, thus solving the population crisis in one fell swoop. A fairy tale-like legend was completed. Since then, the village has continued to develop into a friendly large family filled with the laughter of leader Daniel Harper, the women, and countless children. This story will never end, and they are writing new chapters every day with the throwing ceremony. If this story was helpful to you, please share, like, and comment.